The watchtower at Fort Miller. The transfer private Eli Torres was transferred to Fort Miller, a remote U.S. Army base tucked deep within Montana's wilderness. The assignment was supposed to be dull. 2 weeks of night surveillance from a wooden watchtower overlooking dense pine forest. No combat, no drills, just watch duty. But something about Fort Miller felt off the moment Eli arrived. The barracks smelled faintly of mildew and gun oil. The floodlights flickered like dying stars, and soldiers avoided eye contact when the tower was mentioned. "It's quiet up there," the sergeant said flatly. "Just you, your radio, and the dark." Eli climbed the rickety steps that first night, each board groaning under his boots. The tower swayed slightly in the wind. From up high he could see nothing but forest. No towns, no highways, just endless black treetops. Hours passed. The air was colder than it should have been for July, and static hissed through the radio like someone breathing. Then at 2:37 a.m. a voice came through. "Corporal Jensen, reporting perimeter clear." Eli froze. Corporal Jensen. That name was carved into the memorial plaque outside HQ. He died in Afghanistan. "Say again?" Eli whispered. The voice replied, slower now, closer to the mic. "Perimeter clear, Torres. Eyes on me." Eli's flashlight flickered. Down below, a lone figure in fatigues stood at the tree line, motionless, watching the tower. When Eli blinked, the figure was gone. Only the static remained. Something old had woken up that night at Fort Miller. The second night's sleep never came easy after that. The next morning, Eli reported the strange radio transmission, but his sergeant only laughed. "Ghosts don't wear uniforms, Private." His bunkmates teased him, calling him Radio Boy, but none volunteered to trade shifts. That night, he climbed again. The forest looked calmer, almost peaceful, but the silence was suffocating. Even the crickets were gone. Around midnight, Eli scanned the perimeter through his scope. For a second, he thought he saw a man standing between the trees again. Same build, same stillness. But this time the man waved. The radio crackled suddenly. "Sector 4, movement detected. Who's calling?" Eli asked. "You are." Eli dropped the radio. The hiss that followed wasn't static. It was breathing. He locked his scope on the trees and something shimmered in the dark. A faint, flickering light. It blinked in a pattern. Short bursts, Morse code. Eli didn't know much, but he recognized one word. "Come." He looked down at the dirt road below. Fresh boot prints had appeared leading from the tower into the forest. His own boots were still clean. Eli gripped his rifle. He wasn't alone out there, not anymore. The discovery. By day, Fort Miller looked harmless, just sun-bleached barracks and gravel roads. But at night, the air grew heavy. The woods seemed to whisper. Eli couldn't shake the voice, so he went digging. In the records room, he met Sergeant Laramie, a clerk with trembling hands and nicotine-stained fingers. "You want to know about the tower?" he muttered. "It used to be off-limits. Back in 2010, a patrol went missing after reporting figures in the woods. The only voice we ever got back was Corporal Jensen's over the radio, days after they vanished." Eli stared at the report. It ended abruptly. Status presumed KIA. Body unrecovered. That night, Eli returned to the tower with his camera. If something was out there, he'd catch it. Around 1 a.m., movement stirred in the trees, faint at first, then deliberate. A figure stepped out, uniform torn, face pale as snow. Jensen D. Eli whispered his name. The figure looked up. The camera battery, full minutes ago, blinked red and died. Then across the frost-glazed window, words appeared, written backward from the outside. "Open the door." Eli didn't sleep that night. He just watched the woods breathe. The breach. He tried to barricade the hatch that night, a steel bar across the door, radio unplugged. But the sound came anyway. Slow, deliberate footsteps up the tower ladder. Metal against metal, clang, pause, clang. Eli aimed his pistol at the hatch. "Identify yourself." Silence. Then from the other side, "You left me there, Torres." Eli froze. He'd never even met Jensen. When the hatch finally swung open, no one was there. But wet footprints led upward onto the wooden floor, forming a trail toward the observation window. The air was freezing now, mist swirling in corners of the room. He turned and Jensen was standing by the window, soaked, expressionless, eyes hollow. His voice came out warped, like it was echoing from underwater. "Your turn to watch." Then he was gone, just vanished, leaving the smell of wet earth and iron. Eli bolted down the ladder, but when his boots hit the ground, the base was gone. He was standing in the middle of the forest, surrounded by trees that seemed to hum. In the distance, dozens of dim lights glowed, lanterns or flashlights held by figures in uniform all facing him. The woods. He didn't remember running, but his lungs burned and his rifle was gone. The forest felt endless, pines stretching like cathedral columns. Every few seconds he'd hear that radio hiss again, now echoing faintly between the trees. Then came voices, familiar ones, his sergeant, his bunkmates, laughing softly, calling his name. "Torres, come back! It's over here." He stumbled toward the sound, but the laughter shifted, overlapping, out of sync until it became something else. A low, collective whisper. "Stay!" Eli tripped over something metallic. It was a helmet, cracked, blood-stained, nameplate faded. Jensen, beside it, buried halfway in the dirt, lay a field recorder. He pressed play. The tape hissed. Then Jensen's voice emerged. "Don't follow the lights. Don't answer the voice. Once you hear it, it knows you." The forest went still. Then, movement behind him. Eli turned. Dozens of shapes stood at the edge of the clearing, each one in US fatigues, their faces blurred by shadows. They all whispered the same thing, perfectly in unison. "Eyes on me." The return, Eli sprinted until his lungs screamed, bursting through the tree line, and there it was, the base. Fort Miller's floodlights burned bright again. Soldiers shouted his name. He collapsed at the gate, shaking. Medics found no physical injuries, but said he'd been missing for 3 days. His watch still read the night he disappeared. During debrief, Eli begged the commander to shut down the tower. They didn't. Hallucinations, they called it. Sleep deprivation. He tried to sleep that night in the barracks, but the radio on the wall clicked on by itself. Jensen's voice again, faint but steady. "You made it back. But it's not over." The next morning the tower was empty, and the footprints he'd left in the mud had returned, leading back toward the forest. Only now there were 2 sets. The final shift command ordered Eli back to duty to prove his stability. Against every instinct he obeyed. The tower loomed in the morning light, weathered and skeletal. By sundown he was alone again, the wind howling through gaps in the boards. Midnight came. Static filled the room. Then, a voice not from the radio but inside the tower walls, whispering, "We never left. We're still watching." He turned and saw faces forming in the wooden grain, faint, stretched, screaming silently. He stumbled back, kicked over his thermos, and the steel bar across the hatch rolled away. The hatch flew open. Cold air blasted upward, and Jensen climbed in, his body now twisted, uniform soaked black. He reached out a trembling hand. "Watch with me." Eli fired his sidearm. The bullets tore through mist. Jensen didn't flinch, he only smiled. The haunting. When backup arrived at dawn, the tower was empty. No sign of Eli Torres, only his helmet and a fresh radio transmission still looping. "Perimeter clear. Eyes on me." Fort Miller was abandoned months later. Locals say you can still see a light glowing from the tower on foggy nights. And if you tune a shortwave radio just right, you'll hear Jensen and Torres both calling in reports from the dark. 2 soldiers still watching, forever on duty. The thing beneath Camp Riley. The arrival Corporal Mason Clark had seen enough dust, heat, and dead land for a lifetime, but Camp Riley, an abandoned U.S. training facility in southern Arizona, was different. The government had quietly reopened it for a classified reclamation project. Mason and 5 other soldiers were reassigned to secure it for engineers arriving in 2 weeks. From a distance, the base looked like a sun-bleached skeleton, half buried in sand, barbed wire glinting under a cruel sun. The sign at the gate read, "Riley Training Grounds, Restricted Area." The R was missing, hanging by 1 nail. Inside, old barracks stood empty. Sand coated every bunk, and the mess hall smelled like rot. But the strangest thing was the hole. A massive sinkhole behind the mess building, fenced off with military-grade barriers. Sergeant Delaney briefed them. "That's why we're here. Engineers say it opened last year after an earthquake." Our job's to secure the site and keep civilians out. That night, as the temperature dropped, Mason walked perimeter duty. The desert was silent, except for the hum of wind through the fences. He paused near the hole. Something faint drifted up from below, a whisper. "Help me!" Mason gripped his flashlight and peered down. The beam caught something shiny like a badge, half buried in the dirt at the bottom. Then the ground trembled beneath his boots. Air-cold draft rose from the hole, smelling of decay and rust. When he stepped back, he noticed footprints leading away from the edge. Bare ones, fresh, the noise below. By morning, Mason convinced himself it was a trick of the desert wind. But when he mentioned the voice to Delaney, the sergeant's jaw tightened. Nobody goes near that pit. Orders. The soldiers joked about it, calling it the Devil's Basement. But that night, while everyone else slept, Mason was woken by a deep rumble beneath the barracks floor. The entire building shook for a second, then fell silent. He stepped outside. The air felt heavy, dry but charged like static before a storm. The floodlights flickered. From across the yard, the fence around the hole rattled violently, metal clanging as if someone was trying to climb out. Mason aimed his rifle light toward the pit. Something moved, a pale arm, then fingers gripping the fence. For a split second, he saw the outline of a face, gaunt, skin stretched tight, eyes reflecting light like an animal's. He shouted, "Identify yourself!" The face vanished and the sound stopped. The others came running, rifles raised. When they checked, there was nothing. No tracks, no wind. Just the sand, and the fence torn open like something had crawled out. Private Hughes muttered, "Ain't no man dug that deep." Before sunrise, they welded the fence shut. But deep down, Mason couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was under Camp Riley wasn't trapped anymore. It was moving. The tunnel the next day, engineers arrived with ground-penetrating radar. Mason and Delaney stood nearby, sweating under the harsh sun. The monitor pinged repeatedly as tunnels, dozens of them, long windings spreading outward from the sinkhole like roots. "Old mine shafts?" Mason asked. The engineer frowned. "No, these aren't natural, they're carved." That night, Mason was assigned to guard the equipment trailer. Around 2 a.m., he heard tapping sounds, rhythmic, metallic, coming from beneath the wheels. He crouched down. The sand shifted under the trailer like something was crawling just inches below the surface. Then silence. He backed away slowly, but his boot caught on something sticking out of the ground. He brushed off the sand. A helmet caked with dirt, its nameplate scratched, Lieutenant Harper. The name hit him like ice. Harper was on a missing personnel list from 1987, the year Camp Riley shut down. Suddenly the tapping started again, only faster, closer. Mason raised his rifle, and the sand in front of him burst upward, as if a burrowing animal had erupted from below. He stumbled back, firing blindly, but nothing came out, just a shallow depression where the sand had sunken again, smooth and still. The sound had stopped. But Mason swore the ground beneath him pulsed once, like something breathing. The disappearance by the third night, the men were jumpy. Hughes vanished from his post sometime before dawn. His rifle was found near the fence. Safety still on, barrel buried in sand. A search team swept the area. No tracks, no signs of struggle. Just one thing. His dog tags lying near the hole, still warm to the touch. Delaney ordered everyone to stay close, but fear had already taken hold. The nights grew longer, colder. The air carried a faint metallic taste like blood. Then the radios began malfunctioning. Static, overlapping voices, distorted laughter. And sometimes, a single word repeated over and over, "Below, below, below." When Mason tried to sleep, he dreamed of tunnels lined with ribs instead of rock, and something crawling, whispering his name. On the fourth night, he woke to the sound of boots outside. The door creaked open and Hughes walked in, filthy, barefoot, eyes wide and empty. Mason froze. "Where have you been?" he whispered. Hughes smiled, voice cracked. "It's not dark down there. Not anymore." Before Mason could move, Hughes's skin began to peel like dried parchment, flaking into the air as he whispered, "It wants you next." When Delaney rushed in seconds later, Hughes was gone. Just a pile of dust on the floor of the base was falling apart. Half the crew refused to go near the pit. The rest demanded extraction, but command radioed back one line: Hold your position until further instruction, Mason snapped. They're leaving us here. Delaney decided to seal the hole. They brought heavy tarps and cement mix, working through the day. But as the sun dipped, the ground trembled again, low like a heartbeat deep beneath the sand. Then came the screams. Faint at first, echoing from underground. Some sounded human, some didn't. Private Harker threw down his tools. I'm not staying here another minute. He ran toward the trucks, but halfway there the sand erupted beneath him. A black, sinewy arm shot out, wrapping around his leg, dragging him down before anyone could blink. The desert swallowed him whole. When silence returned, there was only one thing left where he'd stood: his boot, still steaming from friction burns. That night, Mason sat with Delaney by the fire. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, Delaney whispered, "That thing down there, I think it's feeding." Mason stared into the dark. The sand shifted, slowly, deliberately, as if something enormous was crawling just under their feet. The breach. The next morning, their radios crackled to life. A distorted voice, deep guttural, whispered through every channel. "Open it!" Delaney smashed his transmitter, but the words still echoed, vibrating through the metal walls. The engineers packed up and tried to flee, but every vehicle's battery was dead. The sand around the hole began to sink, widening like a whirlpool. Mason grabbed his rifle and screamed, "Fall back!" Too late. The ground caved in, swallowing the pit fence, the equipment, the trucks, and 2 men with it. Their screams echoed for minutes before fading into a wet, gurgling silence. When the dust settled, the hole had doubled in size. From its center rose a stench like rotting meat and oil. Mason crawled to the edge and shined his flashlight down. What he saw didn't make sense. A wall of bodies fused together, their faces frozen mid-scream, forming the inner walls of the tunnel. Delaney staggered back, whispering, "Dear God, they built it from us." Something moved within the wall, and eyes opening, hundreds of them. The escape by nightfall, the surviving 3 soldiers tried to flee on foot, carrying minimal gear. But the desert had changed. Dunes warped into ridges that led back toward the base no matter which way they went. They heard movement beneath the sand, following them, circling. Mason looked back once and saw shapes crawling under the surface like sharks underwater. Private Lowell tripped and fell. The ground under him burst open. He didn't even scream, just disappeared into the sand. Delaney stopped running. "We can't escape it. We have to end it." He pulled a thermite grenade from his vest, eyes burning with resolve. "We blow the entrance. Bury it all." They made it back to the crater by dawn. Mason armed the grenade and tossed it in. The explosion roared, fire bursting upward in a column of dust. But then came the rumble, louder, deeper. The ground split apart beneath their boots. A single black arm rose from the fire, enormous and skeletal, clawing at the air. The haunting only Mason survived. He woke days later, dehydrated, face down in the desert miles from Camp Riley. The site was gone. No crater. No buildings, just flat sand as if the base never existed. When rescue arrived, his story was dismissed as delusion from heat stroke. But Mason kept something. A cracked dog tag fused to his wrist by burned skin. It read Delaney, and months later, while stationed at Fort Bliss, Mason received a new assignment folder. It had no sender, just one word typed across the top. Riley. He opened it. Inside were photos, aerial shots of the Arizona desert. In the last one, faintly visible, was a perfect circular outline in the sand, and at its center a single open eye. That night, Mason woke to sand spilling from his ceiling vent, whispering his name. The desert had followed him home. The thing beneath Fort Emerson. The quiet posting Fort Emerson wasn't on any tourist map. Hidden deep in the Montana wilderness, it was a decommissioned military installation. At least that's what the government claimed. Sergeant Mason Hale had been reassigned there after serving overseas, told it was a maintenance post. Just him, a few engineers, and miles of pine forest. It sounded peaceful. Too peaceful. The place smelled like rust and mildew, the air always humming faintly, as if the concrete itself was vibrating. The barracks were outdated, with thick steel doors and peeling yellow paint. Every night, Mason noticed the same anomaly. His digital watch lost time. Not much, maybe 30 seconds, but always between 2:13 and 2:14 a.m. One night, while making rounds, he heard what sounded like machinery running underground. He followed the echo to a fenced-off hatch labeled Sublevel C Restricted. The metal cover was ice cold to the touch despite the warm air. He radioed command, but no one answered. Static filled the channel. Then, faintly through the interference, came a voice that wasn't any soldier's. It whispered his name, slowly, dragging out each syllable. Mason froze, staring at the dark hatch below. For the first time since arriving, he realized this wasn't just an abandoned fort. Something was still active, and it knew he was there. The unearthly sound. The next morning, Mason asked Lieutenant Dre about Sublevel C. The officer went pale. "That section's sealed. Has been since '79, he muttered, avoiding eye contact. When Mason pressed, Dre's tone shifted. "You didn't open it, did you?" That night, the noise returned. Louder, a rhythmic pounding beneath the floors like metal grinding against stone. Mason followed it to the same hatch. The padlock, new yesterday, was gone, the hatch itself slightly ajar. Cold air spilled out, carrying a faint smell of ozone and rot. He leaned over the opening and called out, "Anyone down there?" The pounding stopped. For a few seconds there was absolute silence. Then came a low mechanical whirring, followed by something that breathed. Mason stumbled back, flashlight trembling in his hand. He saw moisture on the concrete, condensation, or maybe something else. A handprint formed there, not human. Too long, too wide, and it pulsed faintly as if alive. He sealed the hatch and ran back to the barracks. His bunkmates joked when they saw him pale and sweating, but the laughter stopped when the lights flickered, and all their radios came alive, broadcasting that same whisper from before. Only this time it wasn't saying his name, it was counting. The countdown. At exactly 2:13 a.m., Mason's radio turned on again. The voice was distorted, mechanical but human enough to be unsettling. 3, 2, 1, or nothing happened. Then the base power cut out entirely. Emergency lights flickered red. The generators rumbled but refused to start. Mason grabbed a flashlight and sprinted toward the control room. Every corridor echoed, amplifying his own footsteps until he wasn't sure if someone was following. When he reached the control panel, the main console displayed a warning, "Containment failure, sublevel C." He froze. Containment of what? The hatch had been sealed for decades. Behind him, a slow dragging sound echoed from the hallway. Not footsteps, something heavier, something scraping. He aimed his flashlight and caught a glimpse of black liquid smeared across the floor. It led straight from the sublevel C hatch. He ran. Radios throughout the facility began counting again, faster this time. 6, 7, 8. But there was no pattern. It wasn't counting up or down. It was repeating, overlapping, as though dozens of voices were speaking from underground. Mason barricaded himself in the communications room and tried sending a distress signal. The system responded, "Authorized personnel only." Then static filled the speakers, followed by his own voice saying, "You shouldn't have opened it." The tunnel below. By morning, Fort Emerson was silent. The others were gone, beds unmade, gear scattered, coffee still steaming in a mug. Mason tried calling higher command, but every channel was dead. Only one signal remained open, Sublevel C's internal frequency. A new message appeared on the base terminal. "Access required, Sergeant M. Hale." He shouldn't have done it, but fear and curiosity were already tangled inside him. He descended through the hatch, rifle slung across his shoulder. The stairs spiraled down, lined with sweating concrete. Halfway through, he noticed his breath fogging up despite the heat. The tunnel opened into an underground chamber, filled with rusted machinery and bones, not human, at least not completely. Skulls too elongated, ribs fused together like armor plating. At the center was a steel vault door, welded shut and stamped with the word Origin. As Mason stepped closer, his radio buzzed again. Only static. Then, buried within it, he heard a distorted version of his own voice whisper, "Don't go closer." He froze, but something was moving behind the door. Not fast, just shifting as if waking up, and then came a single deep knock from the other side. The awakening. The knock echoed through the entire base. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a faint vibration rippled beneath Mason's boots. He raised his weapon, unsure if he was facing a human experiment or something far worse. The vault door hissed, pressure releasing. A thin line of black mist seeped through the seams. Mason backed away, gas mask on, eyes watering. Then the door melted. Not exploded, not opened, it melted like candle wax, dripping metal that sizzled against the floor. From within came a tall, formless shadow with flickering limbs, like static electricity taking shape. The thing moved without sound, gliding across the floor. Wherever it passed, metal corroded and paint peeled. Mason fired. Rounds went straight through. The entity's head tilted toward him. For a heartbeat, he saw a face inside the distortion, his own. Then it spoke in that layered, echoing voice. "We were made to sleep." The room's temperature dropped instantly. Frost crawled up the walls. Mason turned and ran up the stairs, the thing following like a cloud of smoke that bled light. Each step he climbed, the whispering multiplied. The voices of the missing soldiers, all chanting the same word, "Stay." The escape attempt. Mason burst into the open air, gasping. The forest surrounding Fort Emerson looked wrong, colors dull, air heavy. It was morning, but the sun looked dim, as if filtered through smoke. He ran toward the communication tower, desperate to reach the emergency transmitter. The metal ladder burned cold under his hands. Behind him he could hear distant screeching, a metallic howl that seemed to bend the air. Halfway up, his vision blurred. The horizon rippled. The base below was shifting, almost breathing. Barracks folded inward. Trucks sank into softening ground. He hit the transmitter switch, static. Then, miraculously, a voice, faint but human. "Sergeant Hale? You're not authorized to be there." Fort Emerson was shut down after the incident. Mason shouted, "What incident?" The voice paused. "Containment breach. 1979, entire site buried." His heart stopped. He looked down, the base was gone. Just dirt, grass, as if it had never existed. Then he looked at his hands. They were fading, fingers transparent against the morning light. The last thing he heard before vanishing was the voice on the radio whispering, "Welcome back to Sublevel C." The endless return. Mason woke up in his bunk. Sweat soaked his sheets. The clock read 2:13 a.m. again. Everything looked normal. The barracks, the buzzing light, the hum of the ventilation. But when he checked the hallway, no one was there. The base was empty once more. He turned on his radio, static. Then the whisper began again, same as before. "Mason." He realized it wasn't just déjà vu. He was stuck, caught in a repeating timeline. Every night the same sequence played out. The hatch, the whisper, the knock. Every time he tried to change something, destroy the hatch, flee the base, it reset. He recorded himself, leaving a message. "If you hear this, don't come to Fort Emerson." It's a time trap. A containment loop. He hid the recorder under his bed and closed his eyes, praying someone would find it. But when he woke again, the recorder was gone. And from under his bed, something whispered, "We found it." The classified file weeks later, miles away in Helena, a National Guard cleanup team surveyed what was supposedly an unmarked site. They found no base, no signs of life, just a warped metal hatch half buried in the dirt. One of the men, Private Ellis, noticed a military tag nearby. It read Hale MSGT. They sent it to Washington. Within hours, the entire operation was classified. The report's final line read, "Subject Fort Emerson re-emerged 09/12/2025, consistent with previous 46-year anomaly cycle. Recommend sealing perimeter. Do not attempt contact." That night, Private Ellis couldn't sleep. The tag kept humming faintly on his desk, vibrating just once at 2:13 a.m. He looked out the window toward the mountains. There, under the faint moonlight, stood the outline of Fort Emerson, reconstructed, whole, and waiting. And through his radio came the faintest whisper. 3, 2, 1. The Watchers of Camp Black Ridge, Corporal Jamie. Brooks thought the Utah desert posting would be simple, just 2 weeks guarding an old military training camp named Black Ridge. It had been abandoned since the 90s, when a live-fire exercise supposedly went wrong. But command said they were sending her to oversee a new sensor test site, nothing more. The drive-in was eerie. The sand stretched endlessly, the heat shimmering like ghost waves. Black Ridge sat between two cliffs, its metal towers half buried in dust. The main gate creaked open with the wind, revealing faded signs that read, "Authorized personnel only, Project Echo." Jamie found the barracks mostly intact. Old bunks, scattered dog tags, and graffiti scrawled on the walls. "They're watching." That night she radioed her unit. No signal. Her satellite phone flickered between static and fragments of conversation. Someone whispering coordinates she didn't recognize. Then, just after midnight, the sensors outside started pinging. Movement detected, hundreds of feet beyond the perimeter. She grabbed her rifle, scanning the dunes. In the distance, faint silhouettes moved, figures walking in perfect formation, side by side. But through the scope, their faces were blurred, shifting like heat waves. And then her radio came alive again. Air-cold, monotone voice said, "You are not supposed to be here." The figures in the sand. Jamie stayed awake until dawn, tracking the figures through binoculars. By daylight, the dunes were empty. No tracks, no footprints, just the endless sweep of red earth. She assumed exhaustion, maybe heat-induced hallucinations. But when she checked the motion logs, the system had recorded movement. Exactly 12 figures, all appearing at 0013 hours and vanishing at 0018. The system listed them as active personnel unknown ID. Curious, Jamie explored deeper into the compound. Inside the command center, she found old tapes labeled Surveillance 1991. She loaded one. The screen flickered, showing soldiers running through the same dunes she'd seen. The video ended abruptly, each man stopping mid-run, frozen in place. The tape distorted, then cut to static. Suddenly, from outside came the sound of boots crunching on gravel. Jamie peeked through the blinds, nothing. But her own shadow stretched across the wall, long and distorted. Then came a knock on the barracks door. 3 slow knocks. She opened it. No one there. But in the sand, leading away from her door, were 12 perfectly formed boot prints. They led toward the ridge, and then simply stopped. Ghost frequencies. By night 2, the air grew colder, unnaturally still. Jamie turned on the base's long-range radio to check for nearby signals. It picked up faint transmissions, men whispering code numbers, coordinates, and orders from decades ago. She checked the logs. The frequencies were decommissioned in 1992. As she adjusted the dial, one voice broke through clearly. "Corporal Brooks, report to command tower." She froze. No one should know her name. Gripping her flashlight, Jamie made her way to the control tower. Inside, dust coated every surface, yet the equipment looked newly powered. The radar spun slowly, sweeping empty air. She touched the console and the monitor blinked alive. Footage appeared. Live surveillance of the camp. But what she saw made her blood freeze. On the screen, the barracks glowed faintly under infrared. And standing outside it, 12 heat signatures, each perfectly still, facing the door she had just exited. Her radio crackled again. "We never left the exercise. Help us!" A metallic shriek tore through the speakers, followed by silence. The temperature dropped instantly. Jamie turned to leave, but saw a reflection in the glass. Behind her, a soldier stood, face obscured by static. When she turned around, no one was there. The lost patrol. The next morning, Jamie found dog tags buried near the communications mast. 12 of them, each belonging to soldiers listed as MIA 1991, Operation Echo. She reported the find to base command. Hours later, she received a reply. "Corporal Brooks, you are mistaken. Camp Black Ridge was decommissioned in 1983. No Operation Echo ever occurred." Her stomach turned. She scanned the horizon. The air shimmered again, and faint figures appeared walking across the desert in a straight line. This time she saw their faces, half-dissolved, skin pale, eyes black and hollow. They weren't walking, they were patrolling. She raised her rifle, voice trembling. "Identify yourselves." Every head turned toward her in unison. For a few seconds, nothing. Then one of them raised his hand and pointed directly at her. Her sensor alarm blared. Movement all around the perimeter. 12 approaching signals. Jamie sprinted back to the tower. The screens flickered as one by one, the figures vanished again. Only a faint radio whisper remained. "New recruit detected. Prepare for integration." The integration begins. That night, Jamie began losing time. Her watch skipped hours. The generator shut off. then came back on with no fuel left. Her body felt heavy, her thoughts slower. Every time she blinked, she saw flashes of desert training drills, men shouting orders, the sound of gunfire, the smell of burning metal. When she looked in the mirror, her reflection wore a different uniform, a patch reading Echo unit. Panicked, she searched the barracks for her phone. It was gone. In its place lay an old analog radio headset, same as the ones from the tapes. It clicked on by itself. "Fall in, Corporal." Her surroundings began shifting, the barracks now clean, operational, lights on. Through the window, she saw soldiers moving in formation. The year on the wall calendar read 1991. She stumbled outside. The desert sky burned orange. Helicopters roared overhead. The same patrol she had seen in the footage walked past her, alive and breathing. But none looked at her until one did. It was her own face. The endless drill. Jamie tried running toward the cliff, desperate to escape whatever hallucination she was trapped in. But the world folded behind her, the camp looping endlessly, each barrack reappearing no matter which direction she ran. She screamed into her radio, "This isn't real." A calm voice replied, "You're part of the simulation now. Hold formation." Then came the sound of gunfire, deafening, echoing forever. She dropped to the ground, covering her ears. When she looked up, the sky had turned black. The soldiers stood in a wide circle around her, rifles raised. Their movements were robotic, inhuman. Their eyes glowed faintly white beneath cracked helmets. "Operation Echo continues," one said in monotone. Jamie backed away, trembling. "I'm not part of this." The lead soldier stepped forward, her double. "You are now." The rifles fired, but instead of bullets, there was only static. The air rippled. She fell backward into darkness. The wake-up Jamie awoke on a hospital bed. White lights, antiseptic smell, an IV in her arm. A man in a military uniform stood beside her. "You've been through a lot, Corporal," he said softly. "You were found wandering near the ridge." "No sign of the camp," she blinked. "The patrol, the soldiers, I saw them." He exchanged a look with the nurse. "There's been no active personnel there since 1983. You must have had a severe episode." They left her alone. The heart monitor beeped softly. She turned her head toward the window and froze. Outside, through the glass, 12 soldiers stood at the edge of the parking lot, staring in, motionless. One lifted a hand, saluting her. Then her monitor began to beep faster. She looked down. Her uniform sleeve now had the Echo unit patch again, and the world flickered, like static returning to signal. The debrief 2 weeks later, a classified file circulated through the Pentagon. Title: Project Echo Resurgence Pattern. It described a temporal containment anomaly near Camp Black Ridge, capable of trapping consciousness in repeating military exercises. Survivors experienced identity overwrite, slowly merging with the lost patrol. Jamie Brooks was listed as recovered pending integration. Her psychologist recorded her final session. "Do you remember what happened at Black Ridge?" "Yes," she whispered. "I wasn't guarding the camp." "Then what were you doing?" "I was replacing them." The recording ended with a burst of static. Later that night, her hospital bed was found empty, her clothes folded neatly beside it, and in the desert under the crimson dawn, 12 figures marched once more, now 13. At the front of the patrol, her voice crackled faintly over a lost radio signal. "Echo unit, fall in." The tunnel beneath Fort Silver Lake. The transfer sergeant Daniel Harker had seen plenty during his 12 years in the U.S. Army, but nothing felt quite like his new assignment. Fort Silver Lake wasn't an active base. It had been decommissioned decades ago, tucked away in the foggy hills of Northern California. Yet command had sent him there with a simple order: guard the tunnel. No entry. When he arrived, he found the fort quiet, covered in moss and silence. The barracks creaked. The wind howled through cracked windows, and the main courtyard bore faded lettering: Project Silverlens. Harker met the only other person stationed there, an older guard named Petty Officer Reeves, who refused to speak much about the tunnel. "We just keep the door locked," Reeves muttered. "That's all you need to know." The entrance sat behind the mess hall, a thick steel door sealed with multiple locks. It led into the ground, surrounded by cold concrete and humming pipes. At night, strange sounds echoed up through the vents, soft, rhythmic tapping like Morse code. Harker asked Reeves about it, but the man avoided his eyes. On the third night, Harker awoke to the sound of heavy breathing. Coming from beneath his bed, he leaned down, flashlight trembling. No one there, but a single muddy boot print trailed from under the bed toward the tunnel door. The codes in the static. By morning, Reeves was gone. His bunk was empty, his rifle missing. Only his radio remained, still buzzing faintly with static. Harker grabbed it. Through the distortion, faint words bled through. "Don't open the door. It remembers." He searched the fort for signs of Reeves. Nothing but boot tracks leading toward the tunnel. The locks remained intact, but the steel looked warped, as if someone had been pounding from the inside. Determined to make sense of it, Harker activated the communications array. The screen blinked on, revealing a message queue. Hundreds of unsent transmissions dated between 1968 and 1974. All bore the same distress code. Echo 13, containment breach imminent. Before he could process that, the room temperature dropped. The radio came alive again. This time a woman's voice whispering coordinates. He recognized them. It was the location of the tunnel door. Grabbing his flashlight, Harker followed the coordinates outside. The fog was thick, swirling unnaturally. When he reached the door, the locks were gone. And faintly from the dark stairwell below came a voice that sounded exactly like Reeves. "Sergeant, you have to come see this." The descent. Every rational thought told him to walk away, report it, wait for command. But curiosity, or something darker, drove him forward. He switched on his flashlight and began descending the narrow concrete staircase. The air grew colder with each step. Water dripped from pipes, echoing down the corridor like a heartbeat. Halfway down, he noticed scratches along the wall, names carved deep into the concrete. All military surnames. The last one read D. Harker. His breath quickened. He'd never been here before. At the bottom, a blast door stood open. Beyond it, a long tunnel stretched endlessly, lined with rusted rails and flickering lights. A faint hum vibrated through the air, mechanical and alive. He found Reeves's flashlight lying in the dirt. It was still on, casting a shaky beam down the hall. "Reeves?" Harker called. No response. Just the low sound of someone sobbing. He followed it deeper. The sobbing stopped. Then from behind him a voice whispered his rank again. "Sergeant." He turned, no one there. But the tunnel light above him flickered, and for a split second, the wall ahead reflected movement. 12 soldiers standing still in the dark, helmets tilted toward him. When the light steadied, they were gone. The facility below, at the end of the tunnel, Harker discovered a metal door marked Research Sector 7, access restricted. It was unlocked. Inside was a vast underground facility frozen in time. Computers covered in dust, folders scattered, old coffee mugs half filled with mold. He flicked on the emergency power. Lights buzzed overhead. On one monitor, a file booted up automatically. Experiment log number 45, the perception field. The entry was dated July 1971. The text described an attempt to manipulate human perception through electromagnetic exposure, designed to create soldiers capable of seeing beyond physical reality. Final note: subjects show signs of replication and cognitive splitting. Containment impossible. A loud bang echoed from the hallway. Harker turned, flashlight raised. Footsteps, slow, heavy boots dragging on metal. Then a silhouette appeared at the end of the corridor. Reeves. His skin was gray, his eyes white and empty. "We can't leave," he said flatly. "We were made to stay." Harker stepped back, trembling. "Reeves, what happened to you?" But as the figure stepped closer, its face began to shift, its features melting and reforming into Harker's own. The reflection effect, the air buzzed with static as lights overhead began to flicker violently. Harker stumbled backward, heart racing. The figure that looked like him tilted its head, studying him like prey. "You came back," it said, voice layered, distorted. "We remember your signal." Harker fired a warning shot. It passed straight through. The figure didn't flinch. Instead, it smiled. Then the lights went out completely. In the pitch black, Harker felt pressure behind his eyes, a sharp ringing in his ears. Whispered voices surrounded him. repeating coordinates and names. He realized they were his own thoughts echoing back at him. When the lights flicked on again, the facility walls looked wrong. Corridors twisted into impossible shapes, repeating endlessly. Every screen now displayed his military ID photo. Beneath it, status Subject 13. He dropped his weapon and ran. Down one hallway, then another. But every turn led him back to the same place, the tunnel entrance. Except now, the tunnel walls were pulsing, breathing as if alive. From deep inside, 1,000 voices whispered in unison, "One of us." The collapsed Harker sprinted up the tunnel stairs, desperate to reach the surface. His flashlight sputtered, then died. The hum behind him grew louder, like engines roaring beneath the earth. The ground trembled. Dust rained down. A blinding light exploded behind him, throwing him to the floor. When he looked back, the facility was gone, just solid rock where the door had been. He climbed the last few steps and burst into the cold night air. The fort looked different now. The buildings stood new, untouched by time. Soldiers in old 1970s uniforms patrolled the yard. None of them saw him. He ran toward them, shouting, but his voice made no sound. His feet left no prints in the dirt. Then he saw it. His own body lying by the tunnel entrance, motionless, eyes open, mouth frozen mid-shout. The radio on the ground crackled faintly. Containment restored. Subject 13 reabsorbed. The briefing room. He awoke sitting at a metal table, a bright light overhead. A tape recorder whirred beside him. Across the table sat a man in an old Air Force uniform. "Sergeant Harker," the man said evenly. "We need your report." Harker blinked, confused. "I don't." "I was guarding the tunnel." The officer leaned forward. "There was never a tunnel." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were photos of the fort. No tunnels, no research sector, nothing. But one photo caught Harker's breath. It showed him standing beside Reeves, smiling. The caption read, "Personnel File, Project Silverlands 1971. His hands shook. "That's not possible." The man switched off the recorder. "You've been through this before." Then he said quietly, "You always forget." The lights flickered. The officer's face distorted into static, and Harker felt the same ringing return to his head. The room dissolved into darkness again. The signal remains. Weeks later, a new security detail was assigned to Fort Silver Lake. The report filed by Private Ellis mentioned odd radio chatter at night. Static bursts containing Morse code, repeating one message. Subject 13 still active. They dismissed it as interference. But one night, Ellis followed the sound to the mess hall. Beneath the floorboards, he found a sealed hatch, one that didn't appear on any blueprint. As he leaned closer, the radio on his belt turned on by itself. Sergeant Harker reporting. Fort secured. Proceeding to tunnel perimeter. Ellis froze. When he looked down, faint boot prints appeared in the dust leading toward the hidden hatch. The next morning, his bunk was empty, his rifle missing, and at 03 Azaza hours, the base sensors detected movement beneath the fort. 12 signatures moving in perfect formation. At the head of the group walked a man with a name tag reading Harker.